talk about this time in terms of immigration, cancellation of removal, and how it affects children. We'll define that and explain that to you right about now sa ating American Dream.
This American Dream segment is brought to you by Aquino & Lowe Law Firm, answering your immigration questions.
Attorney Richard Lowe, thank you for making time for us today. Now, once again, sharing your expertise with us, let's talk about the Supreme Court case, Holder versus Martinez-Gutierrez. Why is that significant, and what is that about? Well,
there's a couple of things that we can take from this case. First of all, it probably doesn't apply to a wide area of people, particularly in the Filipino community. But this is a case that came from the split where parents were becoming permanent residents, but children weren't. And children were trying to latch on to their parents' residency in order to qualify for cancellation or removal. There was a split on the circuits. Supreme Court came down and said, we have to follow the BIA rule, which is you cannot use your parents' time here to count towards your own time.
Okay, very quickly, when it's like that, I know it's not part of the discussion for today, but just out of curiosity, when it's like that and the BIA says, no, you cannot, what happens to those kids?
Well, they don't get the relief. Yeah, they are not eligible for cancellation. They're in removal proceedings because the cases that were in front of the Supreme Court, these were criminal cases. And so they were trying to stay here by getting cancellation removal. If they're not eligible for that, then they will be removed from the United States.
So we've been talking about cancellation from removal before, and I guess this case also tells us that it's easier for permanent residents to get cancellation of removal than non-permanent residents, so those holding tourist visas, student visas, and all that?
Yeah, it would basically anybody else. You have non-permanent residents, and then you have anybody else who is here, and so permanent residents, and then everybody else who's here.
Right.
You know, and we're really talking about for permanent residents, they get into this process because there is some criminal problems. I mean, most of the time, you're not going to get into a situation where you're going to be removed from the United States as a permanent resident unless there's some issue with a crime. So that's how these people get into this process, whereas non-permanent residents might find themselves in removal proceedings simply because they've overstayed, because they've been here too long, or because they didn't comply with their visa when they were here.
How strict is our immigration agencies in going after those that are overstaying right now?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the talk is we're not going to do it, but the walk is a little bit different. In fact, I was reading a case just the other day where a police officer went to a gas station to serve process on somebody. That is to give, you know, for a court process. The gentleman who signed the document to receive it didn't even work there, but just happened to be there. And he said, well, are you give me your identification.
Oh, wow.
That person ended up in removal proceedings.
Where is this? Where
this was in, I'm not sure, I think San Diego.
Oh, okay, still California.
But still, it was here, and so it's something that people need to be aware of, that although there's sort of a larger push to say, well, we're not going to go after these kinds of people who are here in the United States just simply illegally, if they do come in contact with the criminal system, and sometimes in an innocuous way, it doesn't even really involve them doing anything wrong, they can have problems. And this is why local agencies don't want to have this kind of policy, because it discourages witnesses for crimes. It discourages people coming forward with information that could lead to the convictions of other people, because they may have to provide identification, which would then lead to them being put into this removal process.
But, you know, cancellation of removal is what we've talked about before. Let's first review the requirements of cancellation of removal.
Well, there are two kinds, like we talked about. For permanent residents, it's fairly easy. It's 7 years continuous residency, 5 of which you had to be a permanent resident in the United States. And you cannot have been convicted of an aggravated felony. So whatever crime you did that made you removable, it just can't be an aggravated felony. And we've talked about aggravated felonies before.
But examples of that?
Really serious crimes, murder, you know, sexual crimes, and certain drug crimes.
Domestic violence, is that part of it?
If domestic violence is seen as a crime of violence, that is, if there is serious physical harm and the sentence is for more than 1 year, then yes, a domestic violence could be a crime of violence, which would be an aggravated felony. So you always have to be careful with those.
So just 3 things for permanent residents. What about for non-permanent residents?
Just one more thing about the permanent residents is then it just becomes a weighing. That is, the judge determines whether or not that person should stay versus not stay. It's just a balancing test. Whereas for non-permanent residents, we have a longer period of time, 10 years, that you have to be here continuously. And that you have to be, there's a lot more crimes that will knock you out of being a being eligible for this. For example, a controlled substance violation, a crime of moral turpitude, those kinds of things would knock you out. Now, and then you have to show hardship, and this is a higher standard of hardship, which is you have to show exceptional and unusual hardship to a permanent resident spouse or parent, or a U.S. citizen spouse or parent. So this is something that permanent residents don't have to do, but a non-permanent resident cancellation you do. And it's a very high bar. It's a very high standard, and it's something that in our office, we generally do defensively. That is, if the person is in proceedings, we would do that, not necessarily putting them into proceedings to get that.
Right. But you receive phone calls and accept clients who call you who are already in removal proceedings, and you can come to their defense and help them, right?
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. That's what we do. And there are people who at times have, for example, children with severe autism or other health issues, and those things can weigh heavily in their favor, and we might start proceedings for that kind of case because the success rate is much higher. All
right, and that's the phone number to call on the screen if you want to consult with them. They charge a very small amount for office consultation if you want to schedule appointments now, or also they do email and phone consultations as well. Thank you so much, and more power to you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
We'll be back for updates on your idols, American Idol at Boxing Idol sa pagbabalik ng Kababayan LA. Don't go away.